Welcome back to everyone here in McLean and to all of those of you who are watching online. So yesterday, Ed Amoroso moderated a panel of vendors who've incorporated the ATT&CK framework into their products and services in some way. And today we're going to get a slightly different perspective, that of end user organizations that are incorporating ATT&CK into their enterprises. I'm thrilled to introduce my colleague, Katie Nichols, who will be the moderator for this panel. Katie is a lead cybersecurity engineer here at MITRE with extensive experience in security operation centers, and she is a member of the core ATT&CK team, where she focuses on cyber threat intelligence applications of ATT&CK. With more than a dozen publications to her name, Katie has shared her expertise with presentations at B-Sides Las Vegas, the SANS Threat Hunting Summit, and the FireEye Cyber Defense Summit. She was the 2018 recipient of the President's Award from the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu, and she's also a program manager for the Cyber Jitsu Girls Academy, a program designed to inspire exploration in the fields of technology, cybersecurity, and electronics. Please welcome Katie Nichols.
Thank you so much, Rich, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for sticking around this afternoon. Really excited to be here for a panel today. As myself and the team, we go out, we talk to so many of you in different organizations. The question we often get is, how are other organizations using ATT&CK, right? What are others doing that I can learn from? So that's kind of the question that inspired this panel. So I'm really pleased to be joined by my three panelists, Dan Bernholtz from JPMorgan Chase, John Bagg from Booz Allen Hamilton, and Dave Westgard from Target. Unfortunately, John Hubbard got stuck with jury duty. So that's a pretty good excuse not to be here, but we wish him well. So Rich gave me a kind introduction. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. So if you can just tell us who you are and why you're here, right? Introduce your organization and how you're using ATT&CK. So we'll start here with Dan.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you, Katie. My name is Dan Bernholtz. As mentioned, I work for JPMorgan Chase, where I've been for, I guess, about 7.5 years now. And really focus on doing work around exactly what we've been talking about over the past couple of days. So how can we model threat activity? How do we model adversary activity? Look at our defensive posture related to those models and help prioritize kind of the defensive enhancements to help mitigate. So.
Great. Thanks for being here. Move down to John.
Yeah. Is that working? All right. John Bagg, Booz Allen. So real quick, I want to talk about maybe two ways that we're using ATT&CK in our organization, both internally and our consulting business. The first, and to kind of take a step back, and I'll realize that this problem that we're trying to solve is huge. Cybersecurity is not an easy thing. And I think everybody in this room, we're all in the fight. We're all in the trenches doing the good work. But our colleagues and our management, the enormity of the problem can be somewhat debilitating. You get all this outside noise, and you don't really know what works and what doesn't work, and it causes people to put their head in the sand and kind of just keep the status quo. But I think that's the opportunity that we have and everybody here has to break into the boardroom and say, ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to all of them. I have the playbook, the attacker playbook, and you bring out MITRE ATT&CK and you put it on the table and say, this is the game board. This is the space we're operating in. These are all the things that the adversaries are going to do. And we know this. And now let's pivot over and look at our environment. This is our environment. And this section of tactics, this is the space in our environment where we're going to be successful detecting and preventing. And these other tactics over here, we're going to be successful detecting and preventing in this area of our environment. And you pause and you look at the board, and what you've done is you've created the strategy for how you're going to invest in your capability moving forward. An interesting thing happens. The collective blood pressure of the room probably drops about 10 points. And the other thing, and if you've known me for any period of time, you know that I love to get on my soapbox about this. So I'm going to digress for another 2 seconds.
Go for it. I'll allow it.
As an industry, we have to get away from this perspective of one event equals one alert. And I think we all know, and attack and the attack community has really shown us that our ability to detect malicious, suspicious activity far exceeds anybody's ability to triage, verify, and respond. And so what we're doing is somewhat counterproductive. We're taking frameworks like attack and implementing that into detection logic, but then turning the screws on all that logic so that we drive down this false positive to control the volume of alerts we see. But in effect, what we do is drive up false negatives, which kind of takes the teeth out of the investment that we've just made. But I think there's opportunity in that. There's the opportunity to take those events for really what they are. It's the cyber tip hotline. It's potential evidence that something fishy is going on. And if we treat those events like that, then we can say, well, let's use the preponderance of evidence to focus our investigation activity on the objects, the entities in our environment that are most suspicious to us, right? And when we focus on those entities, we break this paradigm of focusing on the individual actions and trying to solve the problem of the action, and we focus on kind of the whole patient to bring it into medical terms and not just the symptoms, and we net a better result.
Yeah, I think you make great points, John, and I think it's throwing back to a lot of the presentations today, right? Talking about when Kyle was talking about false positives, Ellie yesterday talking about briefing executives, you talked about that. So a lot of similarities I'm catching across this conference. So thank you so much. We'll move on to Dave.
Hello, everybody. I joined Target about 2.5 years ago. I'm a member of the Threat Intelligence and Detection Engineering team. My main focus is to build detection that is good for outlining where any intruders might pop through. We build attack around. Pardon me.
No, you're good. I know a lot of the teams at Target use attack, right? I think that's what, when I was talking to you and David Bianco and others there, that was what was so cool to me, is that, we talk about so much about attack being a common language, and you're really doing that at Target, right?
Yeah, I had the privilege of working with Dave, and one of the things that we used to start off with for attack was a discussion of the SANS Find Evil poster. Mm-hmm. And we started taking that poster and turning into tabular data. And as we started going through that data, I was finding that things were mapping to MITRE ATT&CK framework items. And we were able to use that as a starting point for discussions, grabbing other open source intelligence and adding that to this data collection, and then turning that into a series of hunts, and turning those hunts into detection and prevention.
Yeah, I love the Find Evil poster. I've had it up in many SOCs that I've worked in. I'm sure others do as well. So great. Thank you all for kind of introducing yourselves and how your orgs are using attack. So I talked about the purpose of the panel. Let's dive into that. So tell us a little bit about some best practices, lessons learned as you've been using attack, and also what's helped you most with bringing attack into your organization. So I think let's start in the middle with John.
Sure. Thanks, Katie. So I think one of the big problems that we see at the onset is you bring in a framework like attack kind of late in the game. You say, this is our capability and we want to add attack to it. But you've already made investments in data visibility and access. And so what we find a lot of times is that the capability you have is really kind of at the far right of the framework, because you spent a lot investing in the network type visibility and capability, because you can get broad swaths of visibility right out of the gate across many different endpoints, users. But the meat of the framework really lives on the endpoint. And so in that, when you bring attack into the conversation, it's really got to be at the requirement stage, that these are the things that we want to be able to do, and then go focus on what are the things that we need to invest in, the technology, the visibility, the capability that's going to enable us to be successful in the areas of attack that we're most concerned about.
So a follow-up to that, so you have people, you'd ideally like them to start with requirements, and I agree, I always say that for threat intel, right? But if they are beyond that, do you have them go back to square one? And is that a tough message to deliver sometimes? Or how do you handle that if people feel like they're beyond just developing requirements?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it a lot in terms of assuming the technical debt of, past IT and security investments. There's definitely not a rip and replace. There's definitely a lot of goodness. And actually using we're using ATT&CKcon to figure out where your visibility is right now is a super powerful motivator for future investments as well. So not to say, let's get rid of everything that we have, but in the reality of the situation, we're really great at detecting what's coming into our boundary and what's leaving our boundary. Our next set of investments really have to focus on this middle tier of what's going on at our endpoints.
Yep. Great point. Yeah, as a team, we always talk about one of the use cases for ATT&CK being kind of security engineering. Like, we have limited resources in SOCs, right? So how do we prioritize what tools we buy? So similar point to what you made. Move over to Dan. Best practices, lessons learned, what would help others?
Yeah, so I guess when we found ATT&CK, when we kind of stumbled on ATT&CK and the leaps that ATT&CK had made over the last year or two to include Linux and mobile and Mac and pre-ATT&CK as well, and it really became a feasible, viable option to use as a taxonomy for TTPs. There's so many possibilities for it, right? There's the intelligence, there's mapping to detections, there's mapping to protections, there's the endpoint and incident response, there's for emulating red team, all the kind of stuff that people have been talking about over the last 2 days. And it was a bit overwhelming as far as kind of where do we start? And so it's a simple takeaway, but as people are making notes and what are they going to do when they get back to their organizations tomorrow? One thing I would say is kind of keep it simple and figure out, one, where does it make the most sense? And if you're not even sure what to do there, what do you have control over? So is it, you're part of a threat intelligence team and you're trying to find ways to aggregate adversary activity and find trends. Start there and start to show kind of a proof of value of attack. And then as the other teams see what you're doing, and as you kind of share that information out, you already have it implemented and you have people that can answer questions when there's frustrations or misunderstandings or just excitement, and you have kind of resources available already internally that will help drive further adoption of ATT&CK. So I guess I would say, start small, find places where you can control and start to show that value of the ATT&CK and then build from there. If you're like some of the organizations that are presented today, it's exciting to see how far this community's come over the past year. Yep. But I guess that would be my main kind of lesson learned takeaway.
That's a great one. Keep it simple, stupid, right? I always go back to do what you can with what you have where you are, right? Yeah. We're not going to be able to run before we walk, so.
Yeah, that and sorry. Yeah, that and, don't let, it's like that expression, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Yeah. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be some techniques you have questions about, but as Alex mentioned yesterday, it's leaps and bounds ahead of where we were before. So yeah.
As Kyle said, it's a continuous process, right? It's a galaxy. It's not don't stop at green. It's a galaxy. So, heading down to Dave.
Dan, I like what you said about starting simple. It's really important to just start picking at threads there, and as soon as the minute that you find a detection of any sort, that can also lead to more tactics that are revealed, malware that can be reverse engineered, and that data can be put back in the cycle. One of the best practices that we have with that we use ATT&CK for is communication. I was chatting with Katie before this, and I said, ATT&CK for me is a place where the science of detection meets the art of communication. So, and the communication isn't just between teams; it's between our teams and our management and our external intel partners.
I love that. And I was chatting with Ellie after her talk. So much of our challenge in this field is communicating our ideas, our thoughts to leadership, to others. And you can do that, you'll have a lot more success. And I think if attack can help with that, that's awesome. Help with that communication. Excellent.
If you don't mind, just one more comment on that too, is as you grow the adoption of attack in your organization, you're going to be able to do different things. And so an example is if you implement attack in your intelligence team, and you can start to look at trends and patterns with adversaries. If you then implement attack for your SIM and your CERT or SOC or whatever you call it in your organization, then you can look at trends and patterns there. Then you can kind of move to the next step, which is, well, how come I'm seeing this technique used a lot in the wild with the adversaries that I've determined to be important to my organization, but I'm not seeing it here? Is that because we don't have the right detections? Is that because these are the wrong adversaries to be tracking, and vice versa? Why are we seeing something a lot here, but when we look at the intelligence, it doesn't look like the adversaries we're tracking use that a lot? And kind of as you drive adoption, you can use that data and kind of help to normalize and also get a fuller picture of the landscape.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something else from threat intel background, the absence of data, that's intelligence too, but people don't often think about that. So I really appreciate that point, Dan. All right, so you're all very kind, agreeable people, but we know attack has issues. We had an awesome discussion earlier today about some of the challenges. So lay it on us. What has been the most challenging part about implementing attack? What are some of your issues with it? And I'm going to go to you first, Dan, because we've had discussions about this where you've given us really constructive feedback. So how can it be better? What are the issues with it?
So first of all, I think attack is great. Let me preface it with that. It's something that we've been kind of looking for in the industry for a long time. So with that preface, I'll say, I think there is still room for attack to grow, and there's a couple key areas that really stand out to me. One is I've heard the term refactoring or normalizing the granularity in techniques, and a lot of people have talked about, well, there's even something below techniques, whether you call that procedures, you call that technique usages, methods, whatever it may be. I think attack's kind of at a crossroads on, do we want to continue to build the framework down? And will it become overly complex and unwieldy? Because, the beauty of attack is it's very intuitive. It's simple. You look at it, you understand it. And then on the other hand, if we don't, how do we kind of normalize the difference between some of these very specific execution techniques with things like trusted third parties? I think that's one area. The other area is, if you think about the CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, availability, attack has exfiltration, so they have the C covered. I think there's still opportunity for the integrity and availability piece, whether that's new tactics like disruption and manipulation, whether that's whatever kind of path the community decides to take and attack as a team decides to take. I think there's a lot of room to build those things out. And so, for example, in financial institutions, when we're looking at attackers that maybe manipulate transactions or things like that, what is the kind of integrity type issues? The other thing is, I think availability is a gap, because you speak to some people in other teams and maybe they're not as familiar with attacker tactics and techniques. First thing they ask is, where's DDoS? And so, without that, then they kind of start to lose buy-in. So I think integrity and availability, I think there's some room there. So kind of normalizing granularity in those two pieces.
Totally agree on both of those. They are working on, we talked about sub-techniques, trying to get to some more, granular level of detail for those who want that use case. And then on the IA, the integrity and availability, we're also struggling with that question right now, is what do data destruction, data manipulation, things like that, how does that fit in? It's a gap. I look all kinds of threat reporting and there's ransomware and I'm like, oh, it doesn't quite fit, right? Some of the lateral movement execution stuff, but those integrity availability. So point well taken. And I think you just volunteered to kind of help us map that out. So thanks so much for your help, Dan.
You're welcome.
Let's head to John.
So again, I like attack. I think it's great. I think just by the energy and excitement over these past few days, you can see how powerful and transformative it's been. so take that, as overall attack is great. But in terms of what could be improved or what challenges we're seeing, I think the biggest one is kind of in communication. So sometimes we're seeing, or a lot of times we're seeing, a difference between perceived detection capability and actual detection capability. And we know that that degrades over time, or that gap gets wider. But when you use like the two-dimensional attack framework as a representation of your capability, and kind of just to go with what you were saying a second ago, like how deep do you go in that granularity? What's too deep? Well, when there's multiple layers below each box on the framework, it's easy for somebody who doesn't fully understand that complexity to say, hey, I'm covered for this technique, so I don't need to invest in this space anymore, because it's got a check mark, it's got a detection in there or a control associated with it. And it can be dangerous in the long term because you could perceive that you have better capability than you actually have. Now, in that, I don't necessarily have a solution for you other than following that down the rabbit hole to the nth degree. But I think that's been the toughest thing in terms of trying to message, what attack can be and how to message up the successes you're having around it.
It's a great point, and it's something that we discussed amongst our team. And Kyle talked about it earlier. What does green look like? And there's a challenge. The stoplight chart with the red, yellow, green. It's great for communicating to execs, but then do you paint yourself in a corner because they want to know, well, green, why are you still working on that detection? That's not. Green doesn't mean done. It means maybe high confidence. So in reality, it's more yellow and red, right? So I think that's a huge challenge a lot of organizations are facing about how do you define high confidence? What is green? So I appreciate that point. Heading down the line to Dave.
So we see that for people that are coming into attack from an intel perspective, when they identify groups that they want to track, it's very easy to migrate your way through attack and find out what tactics they're using. But for people that I follow, like Nick Carr and Sub-T, these guys come up with these fantastic methods for detecting processes that flow or things that the endpoint is doing. In the process of me taking that data and saying, okay, how do I detect against that? What I'll do is sit down and start testing and start trying to see if it'll scale up. Well, part of my design process for my rules is to build descriptive names and add meta tags. We'll decorate the T number at the end of these, like so many of these other presenters have mentioned. What the problem is I come up with a new technique like for nltest.exe is can squarely align under, there's two, it can look for credentials on a host, or you can look for what domain controls, so you can use it to scan for remote resources. There's a time and place where that kind of an example doesn't fit neatly under one or two. So when I've always said I've kind of used attack backwards, and when I try to map stuff back, it doesn't always align. Now they've provided a great method for me to provide feedback for them, but we'll see how some of that information turns up.
Yeah, so what do you do in that type of situation, right? If it doesn't map to a specific technique, do you tag multiple techniques? Do you just note it's not a technique, or?
We'll give best effort. I think the most important thing with the way that I do my rule name construction and my decoration from original vendor logs is that when it fires the glass, it knows the incident responder knows the story. So in the process of laying a wide net of detection based on attack criteria, what I try to do is try to make that minefield light up like a Christmas tree when it actually transpires, and then my incident responders can look at that and I could help them along the way of telling the story of what actually happened.
Gotcha. Very good. So we've talked about it a little bit so far, but I'll open it up to whoever wants to jump in on additional changes you'd like to see. You mentioned integrity and availability, Dan. Is there anything else you'd like to see from ATT&CK in the future direction? So open it up to anyone who wants to answer. Go to the middle with John.
Yeah, one of the things that that you all have been a little bit hesitant to do, which I understand, is kind of take the next step in terms of identifying like relative priority of tactics and techniques. I think in an initial adoption of ATT&CK, everybody always asks, like, where do I start? And I think that, what's come very apparent over the past 2 days here is everybody's starting with similar, same problem set and kind of moving in their own direction. I think that there's incredible opportunity to kind of collect those successes and failures potentially, and put together a initial set of, this is initial priority or what you should do first or something like that, and have that curated. I mean, it's being done in the ATT&CK community, but it's absent from the framework. And I think that that's, a huge gap in terms of extending adoption past the people who, are proactively, out in the market trying to solution that like lower cut of people who are looking to be engaged, need something like that.
So what would you envision that would look like? Would you like to see, like, here are the priority techniques or chains of techniques, or if you're getting started, look at this or this? What would that look like to you?
Well, I think some of the techniques are super common, and some are maybe a little bit more obscure. So maybe some statistics or some representation of what you're most likely to encounter, to provide some element of initial focus. So if we know that, for instance, that great presentation yesterday that showed the decision treeing of
Yeah, from Emily. That was
yeah,
awesome.
from Emily. It was really great. And if your eyesight's pretty good, you could read. There was across a lot of those branches in the tree, very similar boxes that started to appear. That type of information is incredibly useful to somebody who's looking at hundreds of boxes here. Which one's the most important? Well, if I knew 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10 somebody has to move laterally, maybe I would focus on that because maybe I do have that visibility and that capability. And that's the type of information I need to know going forward, that this is a priority area for me to focus on.
Got it. I made a note. One of the challenges, and if we moved in that direction, we'd love to see more data from the community to help us with that, right? Because we're limited. Our team goes through open source reporting, which has a lot of information. And I think from that, we're pretty sure command line interface and PowerShell are pretty freaking common, right? But do we know that that's representative of all data about all intrusions? Not really. So we could do that type of, counting of the most common techniques based on open source reporting that we've mapped, but realizing that's a biased data set. So I agree that type of thing would be so useful. And if we went in that direction, I guess I'd look to the rest of the community to share data with us. If there's, that open source data is biased, or hey, this technique, you have very few uses of it in your site, but I know that's being used more commonly in the intrusions I see, that'd be great feedback to get. But I appreciate the note, and I've taken a note, getting started, how do we start? What techniques do we focus on? Another thing Blake likes to talk about is bottleneck techniques, right? And so maybe we could do something around that. Like once adversaries get in, they're probably gonna have to do some kind of discovery before they move laterally, right? Or a lot of them are gonna dump credentials. So what are those things they're gonna do early on? Kind of mapping like a kill chain lifecycle thing with ATT&CK, combining frameworks, mind blown, but that's something else to look at there. So I appreciate the feedback, and we'll see what we can do. Heading down, either Dan or Dave, any comments on future, what you'd like to see?
One of the things that that I'd like to see is, pardon me, I can't talk right now.
Got some water underneath there. Do you want to jump in, Dan? Well,
jump in. So,
Dave has a drink.
It's been touched on quite a bit, and I don't think the answer is immediately clear, and which is fine. But it's how do we now encapsulate the data that's collected by using attack and help that to make these risk decisions. So, sometimes I think about the difference between understanding your defensive posture and where your defenses are lacking, and also quantifying risk. So if you look at frameworks like NIST or some of these others, when you look at the level of abstraction with a lot of risk frameworks, and then you look at attack, ideally you're going to be collecting information that makes objective data that helps you make these risk decisions. How do we now take this, wrap it either with a risk framework or find some mapping, and be able to kind of maintain these things so that we can say, okay, the operations teams are collecting a bunch of data. This is what the findings are. This is what we're seeing. And now this is related to kind of the larger picture when we look at broader risk frameworks. Where is that connective tissue?
Great point. We'll head back down to Dave.
Some of the things that we've talked about in the past are the resistance for MITRE to go too far in their descriptions, and the stated position that you're going to rely on the user to do the extension. What I'd like to see in the future is perhaps develop some curriculum where MITRE can say is, look, this is really how far we're going to go on this topic, and we're not going to go here. The interpretation is up to you. So it's an elimination of that fuzzy line rather than just be put back. And I think that'd be something that would make a great opportunity for a SANS course or something like that.
Interesting. Taking the note. Yeah, we've aligned some of kind of our philosophies and tried to explain those in a philosophy paper, but kind of going one step further, like what do we do, what do we not do? So certainly appreciate that. Well, as we start to close up the panel, and we'll open up to Q&A, but wanted to give you a chance. What else haven't we talked about? If there are organizations who are just starting with attack especially, what have we missed? What else do you think it's important for them to know? And we'll start with Dan and just go down the line.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I think something that's been interesting by looking at the defensive mappings or the control mappings to techniques, some of them map very cleanly to detective controls. Some of them map cleanly to protect controls. So one of the things that I think is almost a better path to take is, instead of relying so heavily on just a type of control, whether that be detect, protect, system hardening, et cetera, you can kind of build a narrative around these different techniques and say, for these, we really focus on protect controls, or for these, we really focus on system hardening. For these, it's more of a detection strategy to identify, and not really look at it as each type of control needs to completely fill in the entire framework. And so I think that's something that's worthwhile to take a look at in your organizations.
John.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it kind of leads into my thought as well. When you start out with attack, it can be, you can be all energized and you say, I'm going to do all of this, right? I'm just going to check off every box here. It's not really possible or feasible. And, at least my understanding, and you all might disagree with me, it's not really the intention of attack to say you must be able to prevent, detect, control all of these things. It's more of just a knowledge tool to say this is all everything that could happen. So in that, especially when you're starting out, focusing on areas that you feel are priority, that you feel given your environment are most susceptible, and then making that determination of what can I prevent and what can I control and what can I only detect on, and having that strategy out of the gate, but with the realization that 6 months from now you're not going to be green across the board, and making sure you're setting expectations appropriately. Great point.
Heading down to Dave.
Yeah, I think I was talking to a gentleman from Aviva earlier, and I was saying, hey, where would you start if you were just starting out today? And some people wish to go as far left in the kill chain as possible and to try and start trapping stuff as it's coming in. But if they're already in and they're trying to sneak stuff out, it makes a good sense to build detection around exfiltration. But the common thread that we came up with in that conversation was that it's important to start somewhere and work from there. Just keep pulling that thread. When you find something, take an intense look at it, figure out, try to go down the attribution route if that's possible. Try to examine what this thing does, and if there's versions of it that have been viewed seen in the past, and just to try and build out that picture. And so it can be approached very organically from a simple, humble start. I think it's important to note that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I should mention that, one of the challenges as we talk about prioritizing where we start, we don't want attack to be too prescriptive, right? Because we realize every organization's different. So I guess we look to the community, right, to give each other ideas. But if there's a way we can help folks get started more easily, I think we can certainly look at that. So in our remaining time, wanting to open it up to audience questions and answers. Please, we have a throw mic. We got the mics in the center. So any questions for our panelists? As people are thinking about it, one I have for John, because as Booz Allen, you probably walk into a lot of SOCs. I was wondering if there's common misconceptions you've heard. If people walk in and they say, I want attack, misconceptions about what it is or how it can be used that you've heard?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the point from just a second ago that we walk in and somebody's like, hey, I found this great thing called attack. Have you seen it? I'm like, yeah, we think it's great too. And they're like, I want this, right? I want all of this. Go do that, right? And
do attack.
Do attack. Because it makes sense. These are all the things that they can do, so we'll just stop it all. And again, it's not that easy. And just understanding the problem space doesn't really remove the requirement, to do the hard work to get there. And I think that the energy goes down a little bit when you say that.
It's hard work. No one likes to hear that, right?
Yeah.
One easy button.
There's certainly no easy button, but yeah, I think that's it.
There isn't in cybersecurity, right?
Yeah.
I'll give Dan and Dave, if you want to jump in on that one, any misconceptions you've heard? If not, we can open it up.
Just a funny one. Sometimes people that really haven't looked at attack yet think that attack is the analysis. Like, let's just use attack for that. And it's, no, attack's just the language to kind of convey the analysis. It doesn't replace the work that you have to do. So that's kind of been a funny misconception. And so we've created almost like a vendor slick type thing on attack and what it does. And we've used that to kind of message around internally. But that's been kind of a funny one.
Nice. Very cool.
There's one misconception that I've noticed is that coming from other people in our organizations or peers is that attack is a thing instead of a way of communicating or a way of thinking. I think I've seen that.
Yeah, very similar answer from all of you, right? Like people thinking it's a tool or something that's already done rather than a framework, a way of thinking, a way of communicating. I like that. We've got a question over here. Nice throw.
Hi, sorry, not having used this thing before. Sean Lingus with Cyberscoop. Dan, the financial sector's gotten quite a bit of credit for becoming more resilient in recent years in response to high-profile events, some of it nation state. Can you talk a little bit about how you've achieved that resilience and what's left to be done? I mean, you can talk about attack in that context too, but maybe specific examples from the field. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Maybe that's something we can chat through more afterwards. But I think just in concept, things like attack have really helped us be able to make the case for defenses or make the case for wanting improved resiliency because you're able to look at trends, you're able to look at patterns, you're able to kind of aggregate data into now defined buckets instead of these kind of just general concepts. And so obviously, I think information sharing in the financial sector is fantastic. Organizations like FSARC and FSISAC have been incredibly valuable. And I think, just as we mature and we're able to continue to make the case, whether it be from observed activity at other organizations, which they've now shared to us, or by kind of diving deeper and more clearly defining what we're seeing. I think that's been a big part of it. Also, it's just because of events. It's not something that we need to kind of convince people of anymore. It's something that people are really kind of said, okay, yeah, we're fully on board. Let's fix this. Let's improve our defenses.
Great point. I think we all know cybersecurity is an issue, right? Don't have to make that case anymore. There's a new breach every day.
Yeah, and if I could just say one additional thing, in terms of like the more mature capabilities, one area that we really see a lot of investment in finance, in the financial sector and other sectors, from the kind of upper echelon capabilities is kind of that atomic red teaming theme where more continuously you're testing your capability to prove that you actually can do the thing that you say you can do. And I think that has been really just like the next evolution to make sure that you don't build a great capability and then have it trail off, that you're really keeping up and well, yeah, and you're staying sharp.
Dave, any comments on this one?
I'm trying to reconcile with what he was saying. I think it's really important to learn from bad things that happen wherever they happen, and to take that lessons from what people are going through now, and try to do that self-examination is going to be helpful for any organization.
Thank you so much. And we've heard a lot of great things from you all, so thank you all so much. I keep going back to Dan's comment, keep it simple, right? Show the value, start with what you can, the data you have. So really appreciate all of you being here. So please join me in thanking our panelists.